So let's look at some of the masters. Some paintings we have here to kind of just go through and talk about some of the materials. This is a beautiful painting by John Singer Sargent of two octopi. And what I love about this painting is you can see those same qualities, the translucency of kind of the skin-like stuff that's going on. I actually don't even know what that's called, but that membrane-like quality. And you can feel the wetness of it. And if you look at here at the handling of paint, it's very simple. You've got highlights, the right values, showing off the local color of these objects is really fantastic and really something to study. Here we have William Merritt Chase, and you start to see that there's actually a difference in handling of paint as he moves from material to material, the wood kind of versus the fish versus that brass pot on the right side is all handled very differently. The way a highlight comes off of it, the way that the translucent materials are handled. And here's like a really simple still life from Emil Carlson, but you could see here how appealing he makes these materials by how simply he treats them, and just very kind of beautiful treatment of, just a simple pot, simple jug. And actually, I don't even know what these vegetables are that are sitting on this plate. I assume they're vegetables, but absolutely kind of a beautiful handling of this translucent material.
Yep, looks like hands, chopped hands. Yeah, look at this Pinocchio background, and this is a stylistic choice using this kind of watercolory background technique for the movie, but this translucency of the candle, exactly the metal of the candle holder and the feather, the soft feather, and the basket and the wood surface. In this kind of a stylistic animation background, materials can actually still play a huge role. This is Nikolai Fechin's, and Fechin paints very loosely, and this is probably more one of the tighter paintings that he's done probably, but still, like, you could tell the metal surface versus the cloth, the skin, or the pot and stuff like that.
Yeah, and this painting in particular is you can see how loose it is. If you squint at these materials, and I think that's what's really important, is both when you're looking out at and studying life and when you're painting, if you squint at this, it's interesting how contrasting the materials are. You can tell the cloth versus this kind of brass. I don't even know if that's a lamp or kind of some sort of pitcher jug. Beautiful thing. But you see the ceramic pot on top and this brass material versus the ceramic cup and the oranges and the grapes on the table. And you see how simply he's handling that stuff, the translucency of the grapes and the highlight versus the orange. And even the contrast within the orange of what's like a translucent part of the orange versus the skin of the orange is handled in such a beautiful way that it's so simply treated in terms of his understanding of those things, like the reflection on that kind of brass material. All those marks in the right places really add to this visually rich and tactile sense of the painting. And here we have John Singer Sargent again, and this is one of his portraits. But what's great is, if you really look closely at the painting, it's a lot of loose brushstrokes that are just seemingly random. But when you fall back, you really see this kind of material of the dress and the contrast of the material of dress versus her skin versus the couch material. It's a really close observation that's quickly executed. The painting feels very fresh and quickly executed. But I guarantee, kind of squinting at this and looking at this, it's a very careful placement and study of those materials. Even looking at the frame up above, that the handling of the frame and that material is fantastic. Kind of the right values, right colors, in the right place.
Yeah, it's really important to pay attention. Oftentimes when we think of when we're trying to capture that, surface quality, metal, translucency, transparency, all that stuff, we tend to make things tight. And Sargent in this painting can say no. It can be described very simply as long as you have the right value relationship, and that's what's great about this painting.
Here's another fetching painting, and we just wanted to include this painting because when we were looking for images, the interesting thing is it's really presented as a thumbnail. And as a thumbnail, this painting was absolutely beautiful. And what was interesting is when we looked at the larger version of it is that there was almost seemingly nothing there. It felt like a very quick rush painting, but you kind of step back, you squint at it, you see a reflective floor, you see skin, you see, all actually a visually rich environment. Very simply executed.
Yeah. Human skin is one of the most difficult sort of surface qualities that we all struggle to capture. And, this is a close-up of one of his paintings. And if you look at the translucent quality of the hand versus this gold metallic rings, and that's really, great. Like a translucent quality is indicated if you look at the shadow, on the finger, like in the crevice, and then where the light turns into the shadow on the knuckles, you get this kind of extra warmth. That's happening through the scattered, the translucency of the material of the skin. And the metal surface of the rings are completely treated differently. So you can see how soft our hand is compared to the hard surface of the metal ring. Not to mention that it's against this matte cloth quality, which is hard to see in this close-up painting. And this is a perfect one in a way that the quality of the skin versus this clay sculpture, and clearly you have this different surface quality to describe living thing versus non-living things, and exactly what is the organic living thing in this painting, although both are painted just as tightly, loosely, and you can't. This is not just because one is black, one is gray, and one is skin color. It's really the way light is reacting is describing what they are.
So we know that overall this can seem like a bit overwhelming. Like, we're going to try to simplify your understanding of materials and talk about why light reacts a certain way to different surfaces. On a microscopic level, one of the big questions is why does certain objects have highlights and others don't? Why do certain objects reflect and why do others seem to be softer materials? We like to think of it as surface quality. Surface quality helps to determine how light reacts to an object. So a rough surface is something where we could say if we looked at kind of close up at this surface, the surface quality of an object like this, that could be anything from a certain kind of plastic or cloth, paper sort of material, is that when we zoom into the surface quality of it, it's actually a rough texture, that there's actually what you might say is tooth to the texture. And because there's tooth, when light falls down on it, so if this is light coming from a single direction, like a spotlight or something like that, or overcast light in a certain way, that it actually reflects off of this object, but it reflects in a way of pushing the light back at us in different directions. So that light gets scattered. So light is hitting this, there is a reflection, but the reflection is kind of broken up and scattered. So oftentimes in a situation like this, a roughed object might not have specifically a highlight.
Yeah, if you think of it as like it's basically the difference between direct light versus diffused light in a way. The rough surface diffuses the light when it's bounced off. So in a way, the surface quality is actually creating the diffused lighting setup in a way.
So this is just us stepping through, like what happens if you take that rough surface and start to smooth it out? The surface actually becomes more reflective, is the idea. So you're starting to see here a highlight is starting to form as an object becomes less rough. So the surface quality, if you imagine it kind of getting bulldozed each time, a little bit scraped off, so it's becoming a more polished object, right? And we get here and start to really describe like a form and a bit of reflection, but it's still not a tight reflection. So as we go through things, we actually get to like a reflective surface where you might see the actual reflection of the window where the light is coming through to hit this ball. You're actually seeing the surface of the object that the object is sitting on, this table, is actually being reflected in the ball, as well as this overall, the room is being reflected. So this is where a surface is actually, if you zoomed into it, extremely smooth. That means that as this light hits it, it's reflected back, kind of right back, directly back from that surface. So this light that's hitting it is directly reflecting into our eyes. So it's important to keep in mind that a highlight is actually a reflection of the light source. So there are other qualities that we also need to talk about. There's not just kind of surface qualities, but objects actually could also be transparent. So in an object like this, that might be a glass ball or something like that, a glass sphere, light is actually passing through the object. So a direct light that's coming from the window is actually passing through, reflecting off that surface, but then also penetrating the object and actually reflecting off the backside of that ball and even casting light into its cast shadow. The reason why sometimes it's so hard and difficult to paint an object that's transparent like this is because you're seeing multiple things. You're seeing multiple highlights, in other words, multiple reflections of the light source. You're also on some level seeing that it's a polished surface, so you're seeing a reflection of the room at the same time. And all of these things add to a visually complex object. On top of that, it has its own form. Yeah. It's not always a ball, obviously. Sometimes it could be a cup or a glass or even a window. But those properties are happening because of a smooth surface and reflective objects that are allowing light to pass through it. Now, not all objects that allow light to pass through it are completely transparent. We also have objects that are translucent. In other words, objects that allow light to pass through, but actually that the material of the object is kind of bouncing the light inside the object. So light is penetrating the surface of the object, but actually is bouncing around inside the object and then overall has a direction that it's going in, that the light enters through, but that once it enters through, it's generally bouncing around inside the object, creating kind of light passing through its shadow side of the object.
Yeah, so you can kind of see the cast shadow has the red influence. That's this light passing through, just like a transparency. The only difference is that it's completely diffused out. So the color and the light is, still coming through a little bit, but not as strong, and definitely it's diffused out. So you can kind of think of it as overcast day. The cloud is this big translucent, clouds covering the where the sunlight is coming through. So the sunlight is completely diffused off, bouncing inside the clouds, and then by the time it reaches out to us, it's completely diffused out.
Right. So the local color of this ball obviously is different than the others. It's a red ball. Also, the surface quality of this is that it's a generally rough kind of surface. So, it also could be a polished surface that is translucent. Translucency has to do with how light passes through the object, not necessarily the quality of its surface.
Yep.
So that kind of is overall the qualities we'd like for you to pay attention to. There are other qualities to materials that get into more nuances, but we felt like this is a good general coverage of how materials react to light. So things to pay attention to are the surface quality. So is it a rough surface or a polished surface, a smooth surface that's polished? So in other words, is it reflective? Should you be seeing a highlight that's coming off of it or a reflection that's coming off of it? Also, is it transparent? Can you see through it? Is light passing through it? Or is it translucent, where light is passing through, but it's kind of being diffused as it passes through the object? So these are things that we want you to pay attention to as you're painting your own paintings.